You're watching GMT on BBC World News. Our top stories: political deadlock in Israel after the second general election in 5 months. Benjamin Netanyahu's hold on power looks increasingly fragile as unofficial results suggest no party has won enough seats to form a government. Iran denies involvement in attacks on Saudi oil installations as Saudi's new ambassador to Britain warns against a hasty response to the attack.
We are trying not to react too quickly because the last thing we need is more conflict in the region.
The devastating effects of snake bites on rural communities will have a special report on what can be done to combat them. And the Federal Reserve is expected to cut US interest rates again later today, but will it be enough to keep President Trump happy? Hello, you're very welcome to GMT. I'm Nuala McGovern. Israel is heading for more political deadlock, with unofficial results suggesting that no party has won enough seats to form a government. The current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, seen here, he's from the Likud party. He is neck and neck on 32 seats with the main rivals, the Blue and White Party led by Benny Gantz. Now, these results, they're according to the public broadcaster Khan. So uncertainty ahead for Israel. Barbara Plett-Usher has the latest from Jerusalem.
The veteran survivor of Israeli politics has suffered a blow. Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't able to muster the majority to form a government. If the exit polls are right, his Likud party may even have lost seats to the opposition. That leaves him fewer options to defend against possible indictments on corruption charges. But he's nowhere close to admitting defeat.
We are still awaiting the final results, but one thing is clear. The state of Israel is at an historic juncture in time. We are facing immense opportunities and immense challenges, security and diplomatic challenges, headed by the existential threat that Israel faces from Iran and its proxies. And we are fighting them tirelessly and fearlessly.
A sense of victory at the headquarters of the main opposition Blue and White Party. Its leader, Benny Gantz, is hoping the results will give him leverage to form a broad unity government, with Likud, but without Netanyahu. Those would be the opening terms, anyway.
We await the final results. We will see how things develop. For a long time we've been busy, now it's time to really run. We'll wait another day or 2 days. We wish the people of Israel a good and desirable unity government. When things calm down a bit, we will start our path.
A lot hinges on this man, Avigdor Lieberman, Netanyahu's one-time ally who's won enough seats to serve as kingmaker. Neither side can form a government without him.
There is one and only option: a national unity government, broad liberal government. We say this again this time, that we won't need any other option. For us, there is no option. We will not sit down, certainly not in a government with the Arab Party.
In fact, Israel's Arab citizens put in a strong showing, despite or perhaps because of Netanyahu's harsh campaign rhetoric against them. They've increased their power to influence the government, if not join it. The election has left Israelis confused and uncertain, bracing for fractious coalition talks that will test Netanyahu's political instincts, and wondering what it will mean for the direction of their country. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's get more from Barbara now, who's in Jerusalem for us today.
Well, the official results haven't come in yet, so we're still waiting to see whether they broadly follow the exit polls. But I've got a pollster with me, Mitchell Barak. I'm just going to ask him whether the ballots counted so far, do they substantiate what we heard from the exit polls? What sort of picture is emerging? Is it the same?
Well, we don't know who won the election and who will be the next prime minister, but we know pretty much for sure that it's not going to be Benjamin Netanyahu.
You sound very certain.
Well, he doesn't have the numbers to go directly to be prime minister, and he doesn't have the confidence of the heads of the other parties, including Lieberman's party, who's going to be really the linchpin here.
But there's going to be many negotiations before you get to that point.
We will have weeks of negotiations, if not a month and a half of negotiations. What is clear, though, is that he does not have a clear path to the 61, and that's
the majority.
That's the majority, and to get those other parties into some kind of unity government is not going to happen because he has his indictment hearings, and he is considered a persona non grata by these people. So he needed a resounding victory. He needed to get 35, 36, 38 seats and really be the leading party. It's not even clear that Likud has beaten blue and white. So he's going to have real difficulty even convincing the President Ruby Rivlin, that he should get the mandate to do that. If he doesn't get the mandate, he certainly is going to be seen as someone who's on his way out, and someone else is going to come in, and it's probably Benny Gantz.
So the results, or the polls suggest that there's a deadlock, it's a tie, there's not a clear winner. What does this say about the state of the country, that after the second election, this is the result?
Well, I'm not convinced it's as a deadlock as it was, because the bigger parties got less and some of the smaller parties got more. And what's going to happen is a lot of parties campaigned on a national unity government, meaning blue and white campaigned on a unity government, Lieberman's party campaigned on a unity government, and some of the other parties said that that's what they want to do. In addition, President Rivlin has said he wants to push the parties into a situation where they represent the will of the people. So it was much more fractured the last time because it was more of a resounding victory for Netanyahu. This time, it seems, there is going to be a movement towards unity, especially to avoid a third election.
Very briefly, what's the most significant outcome for you as a pollster from these results?
I think the most significant outcome in this election is the participation of the Israeli Arab community, who came out in about 10% more turnout. Not only that, they said, you can't push us around anymore. You can't insult us. You can't say we're not part of this country. Already it's significant that Benny Gantz spoke to the head of the Israeli Arab Party, and we may see some movement here that they are getting more involved in Israeli society when they're being pushed away by some of the politicians.
Okay, something to watch. Thank you very much, Mitchell Barak, a pollster who's giving me his latest views on what the results of the election mean.
Barbara, thank you so much. We'll hear more from Barbara later. The US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he is flying into Saudi Arabia later today to deal with the aftermath of the attack on Saudi Arabia's Aramco oil plant. Now, the Iranians are continuing to insist they had nothing to do with it. But US officials say they have identified that the drones and missiles used in the attack came from southern Iran at the northern end of the Gulf. For months, Saudi Arabia's air defences were facing south towards Houthi rebels in Iranian-backed Yemen, so were unable to counter a military attack from their eastern neighbour. The BBC's security correspondent Frank Gardner has been getting reaction to this attack from Saudi Arabia's new ambassador to London.
Where are you now with Iran? You've investigated the attacks on Saudi Aramco, and this is a huge attack.
Definitely.
It's crippled your oil output. How is Saudi Arabia going to respond?
Almost certainly it's Iranian-backed. We are trying not to react too quickly, because the last thing we need is more conflict in the region.
How serious is the damage?
It processes more oil than almost the whole region produces otherwise. So this is a blow for the world and the world economy, not just Saudi Arabia.
Frank Gardner reporting there with the new ambassador. Well, let's get more on this now from Natasha Lindstad. She's an American expert on US foreign relations with authoritarian regimes, particularly Iran, speaking to us today from the University of Essex. Great to have you with us. How do you understand this particular attack? And I know there are still denials from Iran that it had anything to do with it.
Right. Well, I think everything is pointing to Iran's involvement, and the US has already made it clear that they think that it's coming from Iran, because we can rule out the Houthis. So the Iranians are trying to say it could be the Houthis, but we don't think that they have the capacity. I know the UN may disagree with that assessment, but it doesn't seem like it's coming from the Houthis or any violent non-state actor based in Iraq, and there was assurances from Iraqi officials that it was unlikely to come from there. We know that Iran tends to get bolder when it's cornered, and since the U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal, we've seen Iran's actions really become bolder, really taking more risks and engaging in hybrid warfare where they can gain an advantage against a much stronger opponent while also being able to constantly avoid any kind of culpability. And that's what we see here, from the drone attack against the U.S. back in June, to attacks against ships in the Strait of Hormuz, to now the attack against, one of the biggest oil suppliers in the world, the biggest oil supplier in the world, the Saudi Arabian oil supply, which then led to a 20% increase in oil prices. So Saudi Arabia is very vulnerable, and Iran has been very cautious not to directly target the U.S., but to target key interests to the U.S. and to other Western powers as a way of leveling the playing field because it doesn't have the military capacity to take the U.S. head on.
Well, the United States, as I was mentioning, the Secretary of State is making his way to Jeddah today. What do you expect the conversation to be there? We heard a little bit from the ambassador to London, the Saudi Arabian ambassador to London, to not have a hasty response either. What do you think will happen next?
No, I agree that there's going to be more of a caution in terms of the way the Saudis want to respond and the U.S. wants to respond. I mean, Saudi foreign policy, even under the Crown Prince, has been always very cautious and doesn't take huge risks. The same with the U.S. at the moment. Obviously, having Bolton out means that there's going to be calmer heads prevailing, and Trump seems to be indicating that he doesn't want to go to war with Iran. And so what I would assume is that both Saudi Arabia and the U.S. want to have a global consensus on this, have some sort of coalition with multilateral cooperation where they can get some support from the UN about what to do. And I know the UN is meeting soon, so they're going to be able to meet with world leaders. And so if they can get sort of a global consensus about what to do, then they can take the next practical steps. But I would highly doubt there would be any kind of military strike, even a cyber attack or some sort of counterattack on Iranian oil. It looks like they want to wait a little bit, gain more information, and then definitely gain an international consensus.
Natasha Lindstad, thanks so much, speaking to us from the University of Essex. Very interesting. And we will also later on BBC World News bring you a press conference that has Mike Pompeo in Saudi Arabia, expecting that in the coming hours. Still to come here on GMT, after the collapse of Afghan peace talks, a top spokesperson for the Taliban tells the BBC it's still willing to negotiate. We'll be live in Kabul. Deforestation in the Amazon rainforest is largely being driven by criminal networks. That's according to a new report by Human Rights Watch. Around 60% of the rainforests on the planet lie in Brazil, and the report accuses the Brazilian government of failing to protect both the rainforest and those who are trying to defend it. Let's hear more now from Catherine Armstrong.
It's an all too common sight in the Amazon rainforest these days. Vast tracts of empty land where healthy trees once stood. Official figures show that deforestation has nearly doubled in the first 8 months of this year compared to 2018. Part of the problem is a huge spike in the number of fires. There have been more than 80,000 so far this year. A ban on using fires to clear land is currently in place amid concerns that they may have been started deliberately. Now a new report by Human Rights Watch suggests that deforestation is largely being driven by criminal gangs in Brazil, who profit from it and are willing to resort to violence to defend their lucrative business.
The available data show that there were more than 300 cases of killings in the Amazon in conflicts over land and natural resources in the last decade.
Among the victims of the violence are government officials, forest defenders, and indigenous people. The Brazilian government says it is cracking down on illegal activities, but believes developing the Amazon is the best way to curb deforestation. The publication of the report comes ahead of an important UN climate conference being held in New York next week, where governments are expected to ramp up their efforts to tackle climate change. While Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro won't be attending, he is expected to address the UN General Assembly, where he will likely face further scrutiny from the international community about what he is doing to help protect the Amazon rainforest. Catherine Armstrong, BBC News.
Welcome back to GMT. Well, this week we're reporting on the grim situation in Afghanistan, where peace talks have collapsed and there's been a spike in violence which saw over 2,000 deaths in the month of August alone. On Tuesday there were 2 separate suicide attacks that killed 48 people. The Taliban have said they were behind both attacks, but the group insists it does want peace talks to continue. Let's hear more from the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's in Kabul for us. Lise.
Yes, but with all of these attacks taking place on an almost daily basis, which the Taliban claim responsibility for, and yet these attacks kill so many civilians, many Afghans are wondering about the Taliban commitment to engage in a peace process. Of course, there is no process now because President Trump suspended the talks and had been nearly a year of negotiations between the Taliban and the United States in the Gulf state of Qatar. And it was said a deal had been reached in principle, was just at the point of being signed. So in a rather rare interview, I've been speaking to the chief Taliban negotiator, Sher Mohammed Abbas Stanikzai. He was down the line with me from Doha, and I asked him what his message now was to President Trump.
We say that the negotiation is the only way for peace in Afghanistan. So that's why we have started negotiation with the American side. So we hope that the American side, they should, especially Mr. President, Mr. Trump should listen to his negotiation team, head of the negotiation team, Mr. Khalilzad, and he should ask the report from him where the negotiation was going well and successfully. So all the advices which he is taking, I think he should take it from Mr. Khalilzad. But I know that there are some lobbies and some people which are against peace in Afghanistan because they see their own business in the war in Afghanistan. And we hope that Mr. Trump should not listen to those people to continue the war in Afghanistan, because the war is not in their interest, and it is, as well as it is not in our interest.
The Americans say that the negotiating process is dead. What do you say?
From our side, our doors are open for negotiations. So we hope the other side also rethink their decision regarding negotiations.
I'm here in Afghanistan, and Afghans are asking why the Taliban say they don't target civilians, and yet civilians are dying so often from Taliban attacks. Can't you do something to stop it?
Civilian casualties, if you look at the report from the UN side, the most of the casualties, the majority of the casualties of the civilians are related to the Afghan and foreign forces in Afghanistan. So very less percentages
but you also
related
have to take blame.
And that because the foreign forces, most of them, their headquarters and their bases are in the cities and the villages, in those areas where the civilians are living. They are not in the deserts, they are not in the mountains. So that's why sometimes when the attack is going on, so it is natural that civil casualties will be there. But we are trying our best, and it was strict order from our military side to the Mujahideen that they should not target such. They should not go to those targets which the civilians are more these things.
But your fighters, and we've seen it ourselves on the ground, your fighters take shelter in Afghan homes. So you use the Afghan people as human shields.
No, it is not true. It's not true that our people are getting shelter in the houses of the civilians, because our fighters are the whole Afghan nation. They are fighting for the liberation of their country. So the whole Afghan nation is Mujahideen, and they are fighting against the occupation forces in Afghanistan. And instead, the foreign forces and the Kabul administration, they are bombarding civilians, villages, and all this. You have seen for the last many months that they have bombarded hospitals, schools. There are hundreds of civilians which are killed by the air bombardment of the foreign forces.
So he's very defiant there, Lise. Mr. Trump has called the peace talks dead. Is there any hope of negotiations resuming in a meaningful way?
For the Afghan government, the priority now is the elections, which are coming up at the end of this month. They're, I think, secretly pleased that the talks were broken off because they didn't believe that the United States got enough commitments, firm commitments from the Taliban, security guarantees in exchange for this phased withdrawal of US forces. Of course, we have to wait for that next tweet from President Trump to say, well, now I think my negotiators should resume talks with the Taliban. But on the ground, both sides now are hitting each other as hard as they can, and that means there are more civilian casualties.
Thank you so much. Lise Doucette speaking to us from Kabul. The World Health Organization has called it arguably the world's biggest hidden health crisis, estimating that a person dies from a snake bite every 5 minutes. In the first of our special reports, our global health correspondent Tulip Mazumder has travelled to Kenya to meet a new team of scientists tackling these ancient killers.
A tense community gathers. They've spotted a cobra up a tree in the heart of their village. Snake expert Geoffrey and his colleague from the UK, Nick, are in the area trying to catch snakes. It's been spitting venom for an hour. Slowly and carefully, they uncoil the creature.
This is the most common cause of serious snakebite in Kitui County. I'm okay. Yeah, releasing. Okay.
And it's captured. The snake has been bagged up now. Geoffrey is now telling the community that they are safe for the moment from this snake. It's going to be taken away. But this was an enormous red spitting cobra, and I think this community will be very pleased that it is no longer in their backyard. It's been 4 years since a snake slithered into Marta's community. She was bitten as she worked on a farm, losing her leg and her livelihood. Now she is housebound, relying on her brother and his children to care for her.
My body was completely swollen and turned black. I was told my leg would have to be amputated or I would die. I cannot work. I just sit here at home.
Marta wasn't able to get to a hospital offering snakebite treatment in time. Her experience is a sadly common one. But it doesn't have to be this way. A pilot scheme is underway here, testing out new snakebite ambulances, which can get into difficult to access areas quickly.
The biggest problem that leads to this loss of lives and loss of limbs is because of the distance and the duration taken from when the patient was bitten to when they got to hospital. So what we are trying to do with the ambulance is kill this time taken.
The race is on to get to a teenage boy bitten by a snake as he tended to his livestock. Cecilia and her snakebite research team reached the remote village within an hour.
We are suspecting the Panda.
They clean the wound. He's in a state of shock. But the team carefully lift him onto the ambulance and head to hospital. A couple of days later, Cecilia visits the teenager. Doctors here have seen more than 40 snake bites so far this year. Around half of the victims were children.
So Musioki here still requires another dose of antivenom.
Unlike most hospitals in Kenya, this one does have a decent supply of antivenom, but there's a global shortage of these drugs which can cost hundreds of dollars. Musioki's family don't know how they will pay.
So this here is one of the fang marks.
Musioki has a long recovery ahead of him, but medics here have managed to save his leg, and he is expected to return to school. This community is very used to living alongside snakes.
How many have been bitten by a snake before?
But today is a first for them. They're learning snakebite first aid. This is such crucial work, showing the community themselves what to do in the minutes after someone is bitten by a snake to give them the best chance of a good outcome before help arrives.
Communities like this one are lucky. They now have a dedicated team ready and waiting to help them. If this pilot scheme is a success here, these snakebite squads could be heading to other parts of Kenya very soon. Tulip Mazumdar, BBC News, Kitui.
Join us tomorrow. We're going to have the second part of our special report. So we're going to be looking at the search for a new and much needed anti-venom in East Africa's first snakebite research facility. And there's also more on this story on the BBC podcast that's called People Fixing the World. And you can just search that online and you will find it. Coming up on the next edition of GMT, you might have seen this story on our website. A giant panda has died at a zoo in Thailand. Well, we're going to take a look at the reaction in China. Also how they use the loan of pandas as a diplomatic tool around the world. The unexplained death was a huge uproar in Chinese social media. Lots of the users on social media accusing Thailand of not caring properly for the animals. So we're going to have the BBC's Kerry Allen, who has taken a close look at this story and has looked at Chinese social media, and will bring it all to us here on GMT.
Hello there, we'll take a look at the satellite picture across Europe, and you can make out very clearly speckled cloud working down from polar regions. And this is shower cloud. It's driven in by cool northwesterly winds, so no wonder that a swathe of northern Europe has temperatures below normal for the time of year, that cool air extending into some central areas as well. Little change in the forecast through Thursday. It continues to be blustery. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and also the north of Poland seeing some strong winds, bringing showers through, sunny spells in between these showers. Now across southern Europe, some dry and warm weather, but we are going to see some heavy thundery showers break out across Italy, and there'll be a few storms breaking out as well across northern Spain. Otherwise, it's a mainly dry picture here with sunny spells and temperature up to 26 in Madrid. 21 the top temperature in Paris, at least it's going to be dry and sunny. Similar conditions in London, much cooler than that though across a swathe of northern and central Europe. The forecast through Friday, well, as pressure continues to build across western areas, we'll see temperatures rise up to 23 in Paris, very warm 31 in Bordeaux. Some thunderstorms, though, breaking out across northern Spain and also into the Pyrenees as we head through to the end of the week. Now, over the next few days, Madrid could pick up a few showers as we look at the forecast through Friday and into the weekend, but there will be some sunshine around as well. It gets even colder in Moscow, only 6 degrees on Sunday.
The police are here. They haven't been for the last 12 hours or so, but they are now here. This is the response many were waiting for.
The destruction of this medieval symbol of Paris has left the city under a pall of shock and smoke.
Hunger breeds desperation. It's entirely understandable when people have gone for days without food.
Celebrations here are about more than just this election. Mr Modi's BJP party secured an historic landslide victory.
It may have been designed to damage rather than sink, but either way, it has sparked huge international tension.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
My name is Vikram Gandhi. I studied religion in college, hoping to find spiritual answers, but it backfired. I only became more of a skeptic. By the time I was an adult and ready to leave my religion behind, America was embracing the very same tradition I was trying to escape. Yoga had become the answer to all of our Western problems.
For me, it's the only time when I kind of shut down my inner voice. It's like, you should do that, you should do some weight.
And a $5 billion a year industry. The messengers of this movement called themselves gurus. They dressed like Indian monks and swamis and drew their credibility from thousands of years of Indian spirituality. Whether they had a claim to it or not. I wanted to know if these spiritual leaders were for real or just full of it. So I started to make a documentary about them.
After decades of war and millions of dead, the cycle of daily violence in Afghanistan goes on. BBC News spent August documenting the human cost of a conflict the world seems to have forgotten. What's it like to live in one of the world's most dangerous countries? Join us for 1 month in Afghanistan across BBC World News and online.
You're watching GMT on BBC World News. Our top stories: no clear winner in Israel's elections. Benjamin Netanyahu's hold on power looks increasingly fragile as unofficial results suggest no party has won enough seats to form a government. The head of the European Commission tells MEPs the EU is still waiting for concrete proposals from the UK to break the Brexit deadlock.
I will not be able to tell you, looking you straight in the eye, that any real progress has been achieved.
The Federal Reserve is expected to cut US interest rates again later today. Will it be enough to keep President Trump happy? Aaron's going to be here with the business news. Hello, you're very welcome to GMT. I'm Nuala McGovern. The European Parliament has voted in favour of a resolution calling for the UK to leave the EU with a deal. MEPs insisted any agreement has to include protections for the Irish border and economy, and equivalent to the so-called backstop in the existing deal. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, said earlier in the debate that a no-deal Brexit was real and palpable. Adam Fleming is in Strasbourg and he has more in the lead-up to this vote.
So Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, was updating members of the European Parliament about Brexit. Remember, he had lunch in his native Luxembourg earlier in the week with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and he said he came away from that lunch, Jean-Claude Juncker, thinking that a no-deal Brexit, the UK leaving the European Union on the 31st of October with no deal at all, was very real and a palpable possibility. But when it came to the big sticking point, which is still the backstop, the plan for keeping the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland open no matter what the circumstances, he gave with one hand and took with the other. He gave by saying that he wasn't emotionally attached to the existing backstop solution, the actual legal text in the withdrawal agreement, but he took with the other hand by saying he was still committed to the objectives of the backstop, which is keeping an open border, protecting the peace process and ensuring the security of the links economically between Northern Ireland and Ireland. So in other words, he's saying to the UK, you can come forward with new proposals, but they've still got to meet these very exacting standards. And lots of the EU's negotiators think there are no alternative proposals that will meet those standards.
Interesting. We're just seeing that line as well from Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator for the EU, that the UK and the EU should not pretend to be negotiating. I mean, does it feel to you over the past couple of days, we saw the Luxembourg PM, Mr. Vettel, make, some would say, a very strong criticism of the UK and the way they're negotiating. Can you feel if the tone has changed at all?
I don't think it has, and this is a real interesting one about whether these negotiations, the talks that are happening between the UK and the EU are real or not. The UK says our negotiating team is going to Brussels regularly. They're going to start going even more often, and this conversation started off being quite general, but they're becoming much more precise and much more focused. Then the EU says, yeah, but you still haven't given us any detailed written proposals, and if the EU loves anything, it's a written legal text that can be turned into a treaty. And they also say just talking and getting more precise doesn't mean you're actually getting closer to an end goal that is satisfactory to everyone. And you talk to people in Brussels and they think the real movement will not come until the first week of October, because the Conservative Party have their annual party convention at the end of September, beginning of October, and there's a real feeling that any movement will come then. And if movement does come then, that means it's going to be a frantic sprint to the finish, because there's a summit of EU leaders on the 17th of October. And if they're going to consider any revised Brexit deal, they probably want to see a draft of that at least a week before. So if there is going to be a deal and there is going to be a change to the existing deal, it's going to happen in a very, very small window.
Thanks to Adam for that. We'll keep across those negotiations. But now, for the second time this year, elections in Israel have failed to break the political deadlock in the country. Exit polls show that neither the Likud party of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu nor the blue and white opposition party led by Benny Gantz has won a majority. So there could now be a period of talks with attempts to form a coalition government. To get more on this, let's cross back to Jerusalem and speak to Tehila Schwartz-Altschuler, who is a senior fellow with the Israel Democracy Institute that looks at strengthening, it says, Israel's democracy. Good to have you with us. Whenever we talk about elections globally now, Tehila, we often talk about the influence that digital media has on the campaigns and results. Was fake news, as it's sometimes called, an issue within these campaigns?
Yes, absolutely. After all, Israel is known to be a startup nation, so we are very digital here in Israel. In a recent poll that we've conducted at the Israel Democracy Institute, Israelis told us that they use social media as one of their main sources for news and political news, just as television and other websites, which means that whoever is very good at the digital sphere would probably win elections. Netanyahu is well known as a genius of the digital sphere. He has a Facebook page with a number of followers, which equals to a medium-sized television channel in Israel, and he's been using it very, very extensively. The problem here in Israel that although we are a startup nation, our laws, our elections propaganda laws, together with our privacy laws, are very outdated. And Netanyahu took advantage of that, first of all, by bypassing election propaganda laws via Facebook, and also by gathering data about voters, about citizens, in a way that even Facebook during the election campaign said was illegal. We're talking mainly about using Facebook chatbots, other Facebook features, so that to gather information about voters, to know who's a Likud supporter and who's not, gather this information with other census data that they were holding, and trying to create psychographic profiles about voters.
And this is all about a chatbot, so it was an AI application that simulates human conversation. But I do just want to read about Facebook. Some people were wondering, did they act swiftly enough? This is attributed to a Facebook spokesperson. They says they work with the elections commissions around the world to help protect the integrity of elections. The policy state developers are required to comply with all the laws. They restricted this bot in accordance with the CEC, that is the Election Commission's order, for violating local law. But following the suspension of its activity, we received another order by the CEC ordering us to restore the bot, which we did immediately. But you say he who wins the digital may win the election, but we're hearing neck and neck, deadlock at the moment. So perhaps this time Mr. Netanyahu did not have the digital advantage. Briefly.
Absolutely, and I think he also realized that, and the biggest proof for that is the fact that he went back to television during the last week before the elections. Netanyahu doesn't like Israeli media. He uses his Facebook account in order to attack Israeli media, sometimes I would say in an anti-democratic way, and all of a sudden he went back to television, to all the studios that were possible here, and he got interviewed there. So I think it's a combination of using social media to create direct influence over voters, using social media in order to gather information about voters, and using social media in order to attack traditional media. Those two together helped him at least to maintain his power, but as to the final result,
we have to wait and see. Tehila Schwartz-Altschuler, thank you so much for speaking to us from Jerusalem. Now, Aaron is here with all the business news. A big day for Federal Reserve.
Yeah, for America's central bank. Hey, actually, you know what? whatever they do impacts all of us around the world. So, Nuala, actually, it's a big day for certainly for all of us. Hello there. Yeah, the world's most powerful central bank, the US Federal Reserve, is set to unveil its latest decision on interest rates later today. Now, many of the experts expect the Fed, which cut rates, remember that, back in July, to cut rates again, to cut the cost of borrowing, basically, by 0.25%. It all comes as President Trump, he's been heaping a lot of pressure on this central bank, sometimes on a daily basis, to slash rates and possibly even go into negative territory. But it's not just the United States. Central banks around the world are seeking to bolster their economies amid worries over the risk of recession. Last week, the ECB, that's the European Central Bank, took its rates even into deeper negative territory and restarted quantitative easing. That's basically by injecting money into the banking system. The ECB, said it would buy up to $22 billion in debt every month, all in a bid to encourage borrowing and spending across Europe. Hey, let's get more. Pierre Ortlieb is an economist at the Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum and joins us. Pierre, good to have you. So, a lot of expectations. We are going to see another interest rate cut today. But am I right by thinking that in the last month, it's perhaps not as much likely? Some positive stuff's happened in the last month.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me. I think you're absolutely right. Some positive things have happened, and certainly you could read some of the data that's come out of the US in that way. For instance, there's been some positive labor market data. However, that could also be interpreted in a negative way, right? You had a lot of revisions to labor market data from 2018 this year, so that suggests that the US economy perhaps wasn't as strong as many of us, including the Federal Reserve, thought it was. However, looking at the last month, you have had some positive surprises. However, you'd have to point to developments in money markets as well, especially the kind of repo market dysfunction that has manifested itself over the past couple of days. And that really impedes the degree to which the Fed is able to implement its monetary policy. So that, to me, is a very negative sort of phenomenon, a huge concern that the Fed is going to have. So the case for a rate cut is still very strong.
And if you look at the US economy, it is very, it's a mixed picture. You've got industry certainly suffering and manufacturing. But if you look at the US consumer, you mentioned the jobs market, but let's be frank, the jobs market is still very tight. But you've got higher wage growth, which is a good story. And the US consumer, they continue spending, and that's important because they make up more than 70% of the US economy. So it's a real mixed picture there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, although I'd have to add that wages typically are something of a lagging indicator. So maybe that reflects things that have happened sort of over the past year and a half. And the U.S. consumer is strong. However, you can't rely on that forever, right? And they, much like businesses, will be affected by uncertainty in geopolitics, in trade policy. And so those are two factors which I think the Fed will very much consider when weighing whether to cut. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just very briefly, if I can. Okay, we'll get an interest rate cut. What other tools does America's central bank have if it wants to boost growth beyond cutting interest rates?
Well, that's a good question. The central bank as such sort of mostly influence overnight rates, and those feed through into other sort of credit markets and interest rates. But so the main tools that I think are being considered at the moment are sort of temporary open market operations, which would temporarily inject liquidity into the system. And then beyond that, you have sort of the resumption of QE, which, as you mentioned, President Trump has called for. But I don't think there's any kind of justification for that just yet. So the main tool right now is the rate cuts, and then potentially over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll see the implementation of potential new facilities like a standing repo facility to sort of ease and soothe money markets, which is a sort of a powerful tool for the Fed as well.
Okay, Pierre Ortlieb, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much for the update. We'll talk to you soon, I'm sure, no doubt.
Thanks.
Okay, there you go. Hey, let me just touch on the European plane maker Airbus. It's forecast, and listen to this, it has forecast a need for more than 39,000 new aircraft over the next 20 years. This would result in a need to recruit more than 500,000 new pilots, more than 600,000 new technicians. Our very own, the BBC's Theo Leggett, has been speaking with Airbus's chief commercial officer and started by asking where all of this growth is going to come from.
Most of that growth is coming from the Asia regions, from the demographies, India, China, but the rest of Southeast Asia as well, where you have that demographic reservoir of people little by little exceeding to, let's call it a middle class status, and therefore they will have a propensity to travel. That is not to say that the well-established mature markets such as North America, Western Europe, are not growing. They still are growing, albeit at a much slower pace, but off a larger base than Southeast Asia, for example.
How does that tally with climate change targets? Because, of course, more planes means higher emissions, and we're supposed to be trying to cut emissions at the moment.
It does. On the other hand, aviation, driven largely by the innovations that Airbus has been bringing to the marketplace, has been able to reduce its emissions quite significantly. I was showing some numbers earlier that show that over a period of less than 20 years, the unit production of CO2 emissions, for example, has been reduced by more than half, or since the dawn of the jet age, by 80%. There's not many other industries that are achieving this. In fact, I dare say not any transportation-related industry has achieved that.
Well, there you go. Hey, Facebook has unveiled its plans to create an independent board to make decisions over how the world's biggest social network is moderated. Our North American tech correspondent Dave Lee has this.
The whole idea behind this Supreme Court, is to essentially remove the burden from Facebook over how it decides what should and shouldn't be on its platform. That's something that right now attracts a lot of criticism, particularly here in the US, about whether Facebook is biased towards a certain point of view. This board is going to be designed to take that away from them and to make its own decisions independently from Facebook, and they can override what Facebook's policies say and add their own suggestions. It's going to consist of at least 11 people, but no more than 40. Who those people are, we don't yet know. They're going to be appointed by the end of the year. Facebook says those names will be public, as will the decisions they make. The first of those decisions is expected next year. That's when this group's going to get together to start determining what should or should not be on Facebook.
Good on you, Dave Lee. That's it. More coming up on my show in about an hour and 45 minutes. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter. Tweet me. I'll tweet you back. You can get me at BBC Aaron Muller. That's it. It's all yours.
Thanks very much, Aaron. We'll be watching. Now, stay with us on BBC World News. Still to come. The unexplained death of a popular giant panda in a Thai zoo leads to an investigation by China.
Now showing on BBC Real.
Hello, I'm Darren Brown, and I think we can rethink our concepts of happiness. The problem with optimism is that it just tells us if things don't go right, that we've failed, that we haven't believed in ourselves enough, and we should blame ourselves. There are things in your life that you're in control of, and then there are things in your life you are not in control of. The only things you are in control of are your thoughts and your actions. That's it. Everything else, so what other people do and what they think of you and what goes on in their lives and how well other people do their jobs or do the things you want, whatever, everything else, you have no control over. And you can actually decide that everything on that side of the line is fine. You have to feel it. It's no good just saying it, oh, it's fine, because that doesn't have any effect. It has to be a real thing. It's a very helpful thought.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
Join me, Tom Brooke, for the very best from the world of film. From the latest big-budget Hollywood blockbuster Showtime to acclaimed international art house film. Coverage of all the major film festivals and influential filmmakers. And intelligent, in-depth analysis of the latest films and cinema trends. Talking Movies with me, Tom Brooke, on BBC World News.
Hello and welcome to Talking Books with me, Kirsty Watt, here at the Edinburgh International Book Festival. With me today is Jing Jing Lee, whose debut novel, How We Disappeared, explores the world of comfort women. That's Talking Books here on BBC World News.
Welcome back to GMT. A popular giant panda died unexpectedly at the zoo in Thailand, prompting China to send experts to investigate. Truong Truong had been at Chiang Mai Zoo since 2003. You might know that Beijing loans these animals to countries around the world. It's a way of strengthening diplomatic ties. Well, his unexplained death has caused uproar on Chinese social media, as our China media analyst Kerry Allen has been monitoring for us and joins us now. Kerry, what can you tell us, or what do we know so far about his death?
It's unknown at the moment. I mean, this is why specialists are flying out. The Thai authorities have said that they're cooperating with the investigation at the Chiang Mai Zoo as to why this has happened. The panda was, it wasn't old age, it appears. I mean, pandas can live to between 25 and 30 years old, and this panda was quite young. It was 19. So it's unclear why it died. But what's happened since is that a lot of mainstream and official media that's even monitored by the government or directly written by the government, has started putting out these documentaries of the maltreatment of animals in zoos and circuses in Thailand, and really building a dialogue of aggravation in China and fear that this animal might have been badly treated.
Because let's move on then to the reaction which struck us. There was uproar on Chinese social media, and you've been taking a look. What did it say?
Yeah, well, one of the big things that everybody's talking about is Truong Truong and another panda called Lin Hui were loaned back in 2003. But Lin Hui is still there. So a lot of people are saying that if it was badly treated, that Lin Hui should be brought home. I mean, people are very, very angry about this. They really care about pandas. And pandas are... they're part of Chinese media. You'll often see the news of a panda's birthday, for example, and cake.
It's actually a diplomacy ploy as well when it comes to China and other countries, that these animals are on loan. I wonder, would they review it?
Yeah, well, animals, yeah, it is. It's a way of showing that it's almost like I mean, this used to be an endangered species. It's now a vulnerable animal, but it's a way of showing that China almost kind of shows something quite vulnerable that it's giving to another country to show how close it is to them, and it's entrusting them with these creatures. So in one respect, it's a way of showing how close two countries are, but also it's going to make other countries fearful in the future that a panda dies. It could be natural causes. This could actually really damage relations between China and that country.
I'm just looking at some of the cutest pictures of little pandas that are there as well, that we've been looking at. Of course, they're so photogenic, but they're beloved also by Chinese. You were saying on their websites that indeed they have even a tab like news, politics, geography, and then also pandas.
Yeah.
So, Kerry Allen, thank you so much for coming down to join us on GMT.
Control your smart devices with SmartThings in Samsung Smart TV.